Welcome to Unit 5 on an overview of the project lifecycle. This unit aims to develop your awareness of localization project planning and management. We will investigate what project management entails and consider ways of managing our time, stress, work and budgets, and we'll learn about the tools and techniques used to plan and cost projects. Let's begin then by defining a project. The definition we'll be considering has been taken from the website of the Project Management Institute, a professional association based in the USA, where a project is defined as a temporary endeavour undertaken to create a unique product, service or result. Projects are unique in that they are not routine activities where one particular approach will suit all projects. They involve a specific set of operations which have been consciously designed to accomplish a single goal, such as the localization of a website. To say that a project is temporary implies then that it has a defined starting point and an end point, and also implies that the project has a clearly defined scope. In other words, a particular set of tasks which must be completed in order to complete the project. It also has a particular set of resources which will be required during the course of the project. In the case of localization projects, these resources could include people to bring their skills, knowledge and experience, and technology or tools to facilitate and automate the process. Resources would also include financial resources invested in undertaking the project. So project management can then be defined as the application of knowledge, skills, tools and techniques to project activities to meet the project requirements. The aim of project management is to deliver projects that achieve the objective on time and on budget. To some extent, we are all project managers, whether we work autonomously or in a team. The freelance linguist is managing themselves, and at times possibly a reviser or reviewer colleague. The project manager is managing the project team. The senior project manager is managing the team of project managers, and so on. Thinking systematically about project planning aims to ensure that we fulfill the project objectives and the client's requirements. When it comes to designing a project plan, there is much to think about in advance. The worst tactic a project manager can adopt is to dive into the project activities without clearly defining a project management plan in the first instance. According to the Project Management Institute, each project has 5 process groups. Initiating, where the client meets the service provider and a discussion begins regarding the scope and feasibility of the project. Planning, where the service provider begins to plan the project timescale, the costing and the quality assurance procedures. Executing, in which plans are put into action and suppliers carry out their tasks. Monitoring and controlling, in which the project is in full flow and the project manager needs to keep track of its progress, its problems and its quality level. Closing, in which the project is completed and delivered to the client, hopefully on time and on budget. This is also the time for feedback and reflection regarding the success of the project. These processes do not necessarily happen in a linear manner. Some activities and stages may even overlap, and some elements, such as monitoring and controlling, occur in every stage of a project. Projects involve a high degree of team working, where people who don't usually work together, perhaps in different companies, countries and time zones, have to come together to achieve their common goal, namely the successful completion of the project. Let's consider who's involved in the project. The sponsor is the person who provides the money for the project, such as the end client or company shareholders. The stakeholder is anyone affected by the outcome of the project, such as end clients again, but also their customers, such as website or software users in the case of localization. Stakeholders might also be other suppliers with an interest in the success of the project, such as graphic design companies or developers who are involved in producing the original source files. These are people who want to see the project succeed. Project manager is the person responsible for ensuring that all work is completed on time, on budget, and to the desired quality level. They plan, prepare and manage every aspect of the project, including both the in-house and external service providers, as well as monitoring the occurrence of incidents which might impact negatively on the quality or delivery of the project. The localization engineer works closely with the project manager to prepare the source files for translation and to rebuild them again after translation. The localization manager prepares the localization kits for translators, which will include the pre-segmented and pre-translated files or portions of files for translation, the accompanying terminology to be used, any reference materials, or other files necessary for background information or context. The project team is the group of people responsible for getting the project work done, such as the freelance translators, proofreaders, subject matter experts, localization engineers, website or software developers, graphic designers, and other professionals, depending on the individual project. The quality manager is the person responsible for ensuring that processes are in place to check that work has been done to the required quality level. The quality manager and the project manager work together closely to ensure that these processes are set in place from the beginning of the project and that the quality standards are maintained throughout. The vendor manager helps with the recruitment and management of freelance suppliers. These could be linguists or suppliers such as graphic designers, desktop publishers, developers, or any other professional outside of the agency whose skills would be required during the project. In some cases, clients may express a preference to work with particular suppliers, perhaps someone they have worked with before or are still working with. In other cases, the vendor manager will be charged with selecting suitably skilled individuals for the project. So let's think about these stages in relation to a localization project lifecycle. In the initiating stage of the project, the client has contacted the agency's project manager to request a quote for services. It's essential for the project manager to fully determine the project scope and to compile a brief containing all the necessary project details, such as project type, project languages and variants, source files, tools and resources required, details on the required level of quality assurance, the agreed deliverables, method of delivery and delivery deadline, and the required priority order for the localization of files. In the case of website localization, clients might provide only a link to a live website and may require the localization agency to download and compile the source files. However, ideally, the client would provide their own localization kit to the agency, containing all the source files for localization, any previous translations of similar material, a full localization brief, including details of the anticipated business outcomes of the localization project, documentation which lists each of the files included and their purpose, and screenshots of the files in use in case of data corruption or lost files. Depending on the size and scope of the project, the localization engineer may consider using a machine translation engine in order to speed up the localization process, in which case there would be less translation required and a need instead for post-editing services. The localization engineer may use previously translated files to create language resources, such as translation memories, for use in a GANTT tool. These can be recycled in a process known as alignment, and the resulting TM can then be used to pre-translate the source files. Once the TM has been created, the project manager imports the source files and TM into the GANTT tool and runs an analysis. This feature leverages or compares the contents of the TM to the content of the source files in order to assess the amount of translation work to be done, and the report is used to plan the costing and timescale of the project. The project manager uses the analysis report to compile the client's quote, and the breakdown of TM matches is usually included along with it. During this stage, the vendor manager may have made initial contact with freelance suppliers registered in the agency's database in order to inquire about their availability and price for the project. Freelance suppliers will be informed that the project is currently provisional. One of the biggest risks in a localization project is quality, so the quality manager is consulted to determine the type and level of quality checks which must be implemented throughout the project. They will decide whether the application of international quality standards is necessary or required, and make recommendations for any adjustment to relevant QA settings in GANTT tools in order to reflect the chosen QA procedures. It's important to consider QA as early as possible so that the cost of these procedures can be included in the quote. As soon as the quote is ready, it is sent to the client for approval, and no more work is done on the project until such approval is received. Once the quote has been accepted, the project moves into the preparatory stage, during which the project manager plans the tasks and timescale and devises a thorough communication plan which addresses the sponsors' and stakeholders' needs. How often would the client like to be updated with the progress of the project? What form of communication would they prefer? How would the project manager communicate with their project team? And who has the final say on making changes to the project scope once it is underway? Changing the scope can impact on the price and progression of the project, so any changes required once the project has started must be correctly authorized by the client. Gantt charts are a popular way of showing project activities displayed against a timescale for the project in a horizontal bar chart. As you can see in the screenshot, the Gantt chart illustrates what the various project activities are, when each activity begins and ends, how long each activity is scheduled to last, where activities overlap with other activities and by how much, and the start and end date of the whole project. These can be produced in a simple tool like Excel or another spreadsheet program, and they provide a useful visual guide to the overall progression of the project. Alternatively, specialist software is available for producing more complex Gantt charts by linking all the tasks with their dependencies and including resources and constraints to generate a Gantt chart based on the data entered. When planning the project timescale, the project manager must also conduct an assessment of risks and suggest methods for anticipating or addressing them should they arise. The project manager needs to keep a close eye on problems as they develop and be aware of any budgetary adjustments required, notifying the client and/or stakeholders in good time if these problems are likely to affect the project delivery. The vendor manager will contact the necessary linguists and other suppliers to confirm the quote's acceptance and to send purchase orders to them to confirm the work being offered. Meanwhile, the localization engineer will prepare the files for localization, separating text from code and further analyzing the files using a GANTT tool feature known as pseudo-translate in order to anticipate any problems with the reconstruction of files after translation. Terminology is extracted from the source files to compile project or client-specific databases, and the files are pre-translated using the translation memories prepared during the initiating stage. Once processed, the segmented files are split into portions to be sent out to translators in accordance with their stated availability and capacity for the project. This stage will conclude once the translators' localization kits have been sent out. Translation and revision occur during the project execution stage. The linguists receive the files from the project manager, either as a GANTT tool-specific package, in which all files are bundled together as one file and sent to the translator, who then digitally unpacks these files within the GANTT tool. Their package will usually contain all the files and resources required to translate the text, such as a portion of the source files, a terminology database, reference materials as required, and instructions to guide them through the project's expectations. Alternatively, these files and resources may be sent to translators as individual files compressed into zip files. In this case, translators will unzip the files and import them into the GANTT tool. Another option for file sharing exists if the agency has a server-based version of a GANTT tool in which all files are prepared by the agency and uploaded into the server area. Freelance linguists are then sent login details so they can work within the server environment. This option allows project managers to monitor progress in real time, and resources can be updated very quickly in order to reflect any necessary changes which may be required once the project is already underway. Once translation is underway, the project manager's role is to monitor and control the project, dealing with queries from translators and client communications, addressing issues as they arise, monitoring the budget and timescale for any necessary adjustments, and waiting to receive the translated files back from their freelance linguists before sending them out to language revisers and reviewers. Different projects may require different levels of quality assurance, depending on the workflow process and international standards in use. When a large multilingual project is split between many translators, there is a greater risk to the overall quality of the localized product, as writing styles or use of client terminology may become inconsistent. Linguistic quality assurance aims to address these inconsistencies and to improve the quality of the output. GANTT tools offer a wide range of settings which can be adjusted in order to ensure compliance with terminology and a range of stylistic requirements. Specifically, quality assurance is an overall approach to ensuring quality which must be considered from the beginning of the project and monitored throughout. GANTT tools QA settings alone cannot completely ensure the quality of the final product, so linguistic or translation quality assessment may also be used. This is a process in which the quality level of the completed translation is assessed against a set of predefined error categories and levels, which can be aligned with the requirements of the international standards or defined by the user. These categories and levels each carry a score. Generally, the higher a translation scores during this process, the lower the quality of the translation, and the greater the need for further revision. LQA, as it is known, is carried out by linguists other than those who worked on the translation stage, and can be seen as a process which allows the original translation team to receive feedback on their work. LQA is not used in every project. Rather, it is used on those which are working to the internationally standardized process, and in some cases, time and requirements of the project may only allow for files to be spot-checked rather than fully revised or assessed. When this stage of the QA process is completed, the localization engineer takes charge of rebuilding the files into the agreed format for delivery to produce the localized product. In the case of website and software localization, testing may also involve in-country functionality testing to ensure that everything works as expected and is culturally and linguistically appropriate for the intended target market. In other cases, the localized product may need to undergo a process of desktop publishing to ensure that the formatting and layout meets the project requirements. Once the quality assurance procedures are complete, the project manager and/or the quality manager will perform spot checks on the final files. The final stage involves handing back the localized product to the client and awaiting their feedback. It's important to remember that if the client wishes to amend any of the translation choices at this stage, these amendments will also need to be incorporated into the translation memories during the language resource maintenance phase, which occurs at the end of the project. Once the client is satisfied with the localized product, the project manager can send the invoice and await payment before closing the project. The agency team will have a debriefing meeting to assess and evaluate the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities and threats encountered during the project. This is a process of reflection in which lessons can be learned from each project as the agency strives to improve its localization process. This is the end of our Unit 5 presentation. In Units 6 to 10 in this course, we will take a project-based approach to learning, in which learners will be encouraged to try out suggested cloud-based GANTT tools in order to compare and evaluate their use. More instructions on this will follow later in this unit, after our interaction on the importance of the brief. Please click Next to follow on to that interaction. The following units of this course will take an experiential, project-based approach to learning more about localization tools and workflows. These units will not provide a walkthrough demonstration of the features. However, each unit will discuss in more detail the GANTT tool features used at each stage of the project lifecycle. features which have been discussed more briefly in earlier units. Learners will be asked to try out these features using suggested cloud-based GANTT tools, namely MemSource, WordFast Anywhere, and SmartGANTT. You can get started with each of these tools by visiting their websites and registering for a free-only account with each of them. As mentioned earlier in Unit 4, cloud-based GANTT tools relieve the user of having to handle many of the technical issues associated with installing and updating the software, and the learning curve is not as steep as when using a standalone desktop tool. With the changes in collaborative working practices brought about by the Internet and the cloud, these cloud-based tools are increasingly being utilized for their enhanced sharing and collaboration features, and for this reason, these tools are a good option to use as a first introduction to working in a GANTT tool. Source files and translation memories will be provided for use during self-study time, when learners are encouraged to try out the features discussed in each corresponding unit. Learners will have the opportunity to follow the project lifecycle through a cloud-based tool and to develop their understanding of the concepts underpinning the use of such technology. In order to evaluate each tool, learners should try the suggested activities in all three of the tools and compare and contrast the process and effectiveness of each. Our presentations will focus on the features of Standalone Tools, SDL Trados 2017 and MemoQ 8.3. so that learners will be able to make initial comparisons between the availability and level of customizability of the features in these tools compared to the suggested cloud-based tools. Each unit will provide a downloadable list of questions to guide learners' exploration of the cloud-based tools. The final unit assessment will involve answering these questions in a multiple-choice quiz. Learners will be expected to research the answers to the guided exploration questions through their self-study exploration of the tools or by using the help files, user manuals, getting started guides, and other tutorial links and resources provided. Further tasks for each unit will ask learners to produce certain files from at least one of the GANTT tools, and to upload these files to the assignment area of the Moodle course page. Learners will also need to answer more than 60% of the unit quiz questions correctly in order to successfully complete the unit. When you're ready, please click on the Unit 6 presentation on the Moodle course page to get started.